Thank you for watching our October edition of Forage Focus. I'm your host, Christine Gelley, and my guest today is Clif Little of Guernsey County, OSU Extension. Today's show is broadcast from the Eastern Ag Research Station in Caldwell, Ohio. Our topics for today are nitrate concerns in late harvested fall forage and also supplemental feeding. Stay tuned for more details. Welcome back for another edition of Forage Focus. Today, we're going to be talking about something that has been on a lot of producers' minds in October, especially with the conditions we've had this year, and that is the potential for nitrate poisoning from some of our really popular forage options. So, Cliff, what have you brought today?
Well,
give us some insight.
I brought one of the biggest contributors to nitrate poisoning, or the potential to contribute. So what you have here on the table with us today is a corn plant. And what happens is, as you said, we came out of a really good growing condition during midsummer. We had still a lot of moisture, temperatures were fair, corn plants were growing well. But what happened here in eastern Ohio, at least, is that we got hit with a dry spell around September 1. So you got excellent growing conditions, boom, dry weather, and when I mean dry, it really got dry and hot. So stress hit the corn plant in its developing stages. And when that happens, we can get nitrate accumulation in these plants and potential for poisoning at that time of year. So when I think about nitrate poisoning, I think about the conditions that might contribute to it.
Before we go farther, Cliff, can you explain to me what are nitrates and why are they concerning?
Well, nitrates can poison us, they can poison animals, and they're extremely toxic to fish as well. So what happens is we get a condition where the animal actually suffocates. Nitrates can interfere with the ability of a red blood cell to carry oxygen throughout the body. And that's how they kill animals. And incidentally, in my career now, going back 3 decades, you might ask, well, how often does it really occur? And it's not often, fortunately.
Fortunately.
But when it does happen, it can catch you off guard. And it's like a plant poisoning to me. I think the times that I've seen it in my career have been times when it was likely to occur. Dry weather, no pasture. You force them, maybe you're feeding green chop to cattle. In the case that you and I investigated about a week ago. Out of pasture, very dry, feeding fresh green chop right out of the field. Those are conditions where you really need to watch what you're doing.
Those are conditions where that source of feed may be crucial for providing nutrition to livestock. It also could set up the situation where you accidentally kill a lot of cattle or sheep or goats all at the same time, the way your feeding program is set up.
Yeah.
So we need to be concerned about this, especially in conditions like what we've seen.
You do, and it's not only corn. You know, we run into these type of conditions with sorghum Sudan grass, those type forages, corn-related plants. You can even have it with grass. Believe it or not, one time I was testing here some sorghum Sudan grass, and the weeds in the field were actually higher. It had a lot of ragweed, it had a lot of lamb's quarter, and those plants and pigweeds, those weeds actually had more nitrates in them than the forage that I was testing.
Wow.
Weeds can be great scavengers of nitrates too. So don't forget about that in weedy fields. In times of stress, in the fall, when this becomes your only feed, don't get in that situation. So, what I would have done, I would take and I'd make sure I had plenty of hay. And if my pastures got low, I'd start feeding hay a little bit. But what we want to do is, if we ferment this corn, put it in a silo or a bag, we let it ferment for about 30 days, we can reduce the risk 50–60%.
Wow.
So it'd be unlikely to occur at that point.
There's no shame in feeding hay early if it provides the nutrition you need for your animals and buys you some time.
Why put yourself in that situation where, all I got is green chop? Yeah, and maybe there's other opportunities for you too. For example, we could go down the road and maybe trade a load of corn silage that didn't test high. But what I brought with me today is all kinds of nitrate test kits that I've used, and there's a lot on the market.
Okay.
Everything from, cardimeters can give you actually some readings in part per million. They use these for soil as well. They've got litmus, or these litmus nitrate test indicator strips that we can put forage into a solution and test it for nitrates. So this is probably the most popular today. You can go online, you'll see that Montana, Cooperative Extension, University of Georgia, they all outline, even Texas, they all outline methods you can use this sort of testing. Others are using a reagent. You'll see online on YouTube too, where they use diphenylamine, or also a mixture of some acid sulfuric acid that'll cause a color reaction in the stalk. And that's a nice little method to use, quick test you can do, give you a qualitative analysis of what you see here. But once you do that and you have some nitrates indicated, you need to send it off to a laboratory for a more definitive sort of reading on those nitrate levels.
So really here, what we can get with these indicator tests is this low versus moderate versus high?
Right.
But to know how to fit this in our feeding program, we should really get a measurement in parts per million, or pounds, so that we can actually determine what ratio it would be safe to mix it with other feeds. Or do we need to mix it?
Yeah, well, you bring up several good points. One is mixing it. Sure, one of our colleagues, Chris, always says that the solution to pollution is dilution, right? And he's talking about fescue toxicity in most cases. But the same is true with nitrates. We can dilute the effect by mixing it with hay, with pasture, but when it becomes the sole source of the feed, then it's most likely to be a problem. So we use these indicator tests as a quick test to see if nitrates are in the plant we're concerned about, and then we would send them off to a laboratory for an analysis. And also, there's sampling techniques. Anytime you sample a field, you're going to send it off to the laboratory. You make sure you follow the techniques. Laboratories will post how to sample for those forages on their website, so follow that technique and sample correctly to get a definitive answer. Now, we checked this as they were getting ready to chop.
Mm-hmm.
So you could also check it when you're getting ready to feed, and if you had really high nitrate levels, that might be something that you go back in and follow up on as well. Not only before you chop, because you got a choice. I could chop this, I could leave it, but in any case, time is your friend. So we can leave this in the field, let it grow a little bit longer. We could put it in the silo, but leaving it in there for about 30 days or so to ferment, it'll reduce that amount of nitrate that we'd have in the plant.
So
I tested some here. Okay, so you see the base of this plant, you'll see some pink shading starting to take place. This plant is ready to harvest for corn silage. Very little color indicator here that indicates a problem. Based on its maturity, I'd say we're ready to make corn silage out of this. But what I did is I split this stalk. What nitrates will do, they'll tend to accumulate in the bottom of the plant. The plant takes that up, takes up a lot of nitrate, also takes up some ammonium, but the nitrate being water soluble, it tends to take up more of that, and it will be in those plant fluids, water within the plant, if you will. It will tend to be in the bottom portions of the plant. As we get up here above the ear, we hardly detect any at all. So you could adjust cutter height, for example, when you're harvesting this, or grazing height if you happen to be grazing. And we have grazed corn here too at the research station. So that could make a difference on the concentration of total volume of nitrate that the livestock might be consuming.
That would definitely be a strategy for those who might still be grazing some warm season annuals like sorghum Sudan grass, which, as we mentioned before, can have some nitrate concerns as well. And in addition, what we said for corn is we could see some more of those nitrate issues flare up after a frost. So we're getting to that time where frost is going to be setting in. Is there still a safe period that we can go back and graze those warm season annuals without the concerns after a frost?
Well, it's not only the nitrates in those warm season annuals, but also we mentioned sorghum Sudan grass. There's also warm season perennial grasses like Johnson grass, Reed canary grass. The one case, so associated with nitrates, this same time of year, we could have prussic acid or hydrocyanic acid forming, and it's a cyanide type poisoning that can occur with light frost. Usually occurs also in areas with heavy fertilization, heavy nitrogen fertilization. I've only seen one case of it in my career. It's quite a surprise to this farmer, but it was Reed canary, something you might not expect, but it was heavily fertilized, been cut, new growth. So yes, that's a danger as well, and it looks a little bit like nitrogen poisoning, also interferes with the ability to carry oxygen, but when you get this type of nitrate poisoning, what you'll see is a darker sort of blood, darker membranes around the mouth and the eyes. When you see hydrocyanic poisoning, you may as well put red mascara around the eyes, and the lips are bright pink, and the blood even is bright pink. So yeah, you've got to realize the plants you have, what potential danger they cause, and we talk about some of those warm season annuals, and even a perennial like in Johnson grass. Prussic acid is a problem after a light frost and can be associated with high nitrogen application levels.
So to go back to this test, we've had the indicator powder on this stalk for 10-15 minutes or so at this point, and are we seeing a color change?
Very little color change here in this stalk. In fact, you and I tested this field, not this field, but the farmer's field, the same farmer, about a week ago or so. Didn't seem to see any indicators there of high nitrate levels. But if you remember, one of the questions that I asked the farmer where we did have a higher level indicator, a different farmer, is what the fertility program was. So that makes a difference. So nitrogen is a plant nutrient that's kind of here today and gone tomorrow. It doesn't hang around a long time. You don't stockpile nitrogen. But the form of nitrogen you put on does make a difference in how long it will persist. Ammonium forms, ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, anhydrous ammonia, they tend to stay around a lot longer than urea. So that's why I asked when we were out there, is urea is going to be taken up. It's a water-soluble form of nitrogen used by the plant. And if it's got enough growing season left in it when the application was made, we tend not to see as much in the plant. But had he put some on close to when this was maybe going to be harvested, late in the season, and that might occur in the case of the warm season annual grass that's been cut routinely. In the case of corn, it was applied a very long time ago. So that nitrate concentration of it is not there like it would be in ammonium form.
Good. So if we did have somebody that tested with a fairly high amount of nitrate and we got that test back and we found out that there really are some safety concerns with this feed, we talked about ensiling it for an appropriate amount of time, and we've talked about mixing it as another source of feed, mixing it with another source of feed. What are some of those other types of feed we could consider to help dilute the effects besides hay?
Pasture. So if you've got some pasture, you've done a good job managing your pasture, you might have quite a bit of pasture left. You could feed, say, green chop with your pasture. If they got an ample amount of pasture out there, they're going to reduce the amount that they consume, and that's really what it's about. Incidentally, I mentioned I only saw one case of nitrogen poisoning in my career, and what's weird is some poisonings occur with certain classes of livestock. So I lived in an area where once in a while we'd get warnings about nitrates in drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
And who do you think the warnings were for?
People, I would assume.
People, but certain classes of people.
Like the elderly and the very young?
Yeah, you got it. So you tend to see in livestock those type poisonings occur for specific classes. In the case I told you about, it was mature cows that died, and their calves, the yearlings, were just fine. So poisonings can be that way. It is a strange thing.
Does that have to do with the amount of oxygen that they actually are consuming? I would assume that's greater for a larger animal, so would you see the effects more quickly in a large animal?
Part of the problem is that as we age, we're just not as efficient as we used to be when we were young. Maybe our systems aren't as efficient as they used to be at transporting oxygen and diffusing it. I think that's part of it, because that's why the classes are separated out in terms of the warnings. But if you catch it early enough, you can contact your veterinarian and get it treated.
Good, that's good news. So, we are actually going to address in another segment of this episode some more about supplemental feeding. So if you'll stay tuned, we'll catch back up with you in just a second. Thanks for hanging on for the rest of this episode of Forage Focus. We're out here in the field to talk about supplemental feed and how to get that feed to your livestock this winter.
We were discussing supplemental feed, Christine and I, and we're thinking about the winter. And what brings it up this year, I think, is the quality of hay that we're dealing with. So it was a wet year, and what happened was we didn't get our forages harvested in a timely manner. One of the greatest factors influencing forage quality is maturity. So when that stuff becomes reproductive, headed out, brown and stemmy, we know we've got a lot of undigestible fiber there, Christine, and what happens is we're going to be short, particularly on energy and sometimes protein. Supplementation, therefore, is going to be important going into the winter. You're going to read a lot of articles this fall and going into early winter from land-grant universities all over the nation talking about that issue. Ohio, we've already published a lot of articles related to that. Beef Cattle Magazine, or the Beef Cattle Newsletter, I should say, is a great place to look for information related to that. And just about everything we discuss here has already been posted there, and it's got a great library. So one thing I think about is, well, what kind of body condition are those livestock in now? So we're going into the fall. It's a very comfortable time of year. Our livestock should be doing well. Not a lot of heat stress, not a lot of cold stress yet. So if they happen to be giving birth in the spring, right now they're in mid to late gestation. It'd be a time where we can make a body condition score improvement fairly easily. When you try to make that condition score improvement in January, February, late gestation, last trimester, or after they give birth, that can be a tough time to make those improvements. Probably your best hope is to maintain body condition. So assess how they look now. Perform a forage test analysis on that hay that you're going to be feeding. If you have different qualities, maybe a first cutting, maybe a second cutting, you can decide then when to feed that. So right now, when we have low nutritional demands, if they happen to be in mid-gestation, for example, we can begin to make improvements in body condition score by feeding our best quality forage, feeding a supplement. We'll talk about that some in a little bit. But it all starts with knowing what you have to feed. Whether you buy feed or not, some of us might be buying, for example, hay this winter. Well, what's in it? Its value is certainly going to be based on what's in that hay. And the worst time to be buying that forage, as we look at taking animals through the winter, is in January and February. Number one, you don't want to haul it then on icy snow-covered roads. Number two, its price has gotten pretty high probably at that point based on demand. So now is the time to start thinking about that. Now when we think about feeding animals, what's difficult for the average farmer when it comes to feeding is separating classes. All right, so you're going to have animals that need an improvement in body condition score, Maybe they're still growing. Maybe they've carried twins. Could be a variety of reasons. But and then you'll have animals that are mature, not growing anymore, and they're of excellent body condition, and they don't need an improvement. So the problem becomes for the average producer separating animals, because we don't need to feed both those classes of animals the same. So small farms have an issue with that. The other thing is, if you look at putting different mixes together, maybe a mix that is of higher protein and energy for a growing class and a mix for mature animals. Now you have to have storage capability. For a small farm, that's difficult too. But nevertheless, knowing where you're at early enough provides you enough time to make some simple changes. And it can be as simple as feeding a little corn, soybean hulls, but putting out some tubs. But I would look at buying the nutrients you need. For example, if I asked you what kind of fertility I would put on the field, you wouldn't say just put on 19, 19, 19, you're good. You'd say, well, look at a soil test analysis. See what you need and apply the nutrients and the concentrations you need. It's no different for livestock. So find out whether you need energy, protein, or both. And it's going to be based on what your primary feed source is and its concentration of nutrients. Then what I tend to do is look at, well, if I want to buy that source of energy, protein, what feed source can I look at that provides it at the most economical level? What is the cost per unit of energy or protein? That is the cheapest form. Now we buy products not only because they're cheap, but because they're easy to handle. They're easy to store. I mentioned soy hulls. That's a great feed. It's pretty high in protein, high in energy, and it's a fiber-based source. So we've fed a lot of it over the years. I've finished lambs on it. We feed cattle on it here at the research station. We'd never have problems with it, in other words, of overfeeding it, like you could have with shelled corn. Kind of convenient to feed that way, but it is not nice in adverse weather conditions. And we get a lot of rain and snowy conditions, and it happens to get on those pellets. They bloat up into a mess that nothing wants to eat. So look at how you're going to feed it. Bunks. If you have bunks available to you, use them. That's where we get the least amount of feed wastage. And make sure you have enough space in that bunk for all the animals to access those feed bunks, so that that supplement is available to all of them. Not only will you need possibly energy and protein, but you may need some trace minerals, even possibly vitamins. And that can also be determined through a forage test analysis. So do get that performed. In terms of providing minerals too, I still see a lot of block and all stock type mineral supplements. You know, mineral supplementation, just like energy and protein, is specific for cattle, sheep, goats. In other words, buy what your animals need in a high quality product and provided in a loose form. In terms of tubs, I think that's one of the most popular, these energy protein tubs, lick tubs if you call them, because they're kind of a nice little safety valve. They're convenient. If you're working another job, can't be out there every day, got poor quality forage, those tubs are a very convenient item to put out there. The problem is we often can't monitor how much animals are consuming of them, and the cost per unit of energy and protein that we need can sometimes be high with those products. So all of those, not one of them, is right for everybody. You have to decide in your management system what form is of providing those nutrients is best for you. Is it a tub? Is it bunk feeding? Do you feed every day, every other day? There are some sources of supplement, such as corn, that you'd be better off feeding every day. And there are others, protein supplementation, for example, we know in trials we can feed it every other day, even longer periods of time or breaks between feeding it if it's what we need. So look at what you need, Start with analyzing your forage, put it all on the table and decide what is the cost, if cost is a concern. I wish it was with all livestock producers, but the reality is it isn't for everybody, and I understand that. Although we do like to make it economical. There are economical choices in terms of supplementation. Assess body condition score again. If they don't all need it, if you're able to separate out your classes of livestock based on their condition, you can provide it to those who need it most and save yourself a little money. Christine, the last thing we want to talk about here is the site for winter feeding. So depending on the amount of animals that you have, the site can be very important. And it can be important from a couple different aspects. One is it easy to get to? I mean, number one, driving out in a blizzard, delivering feed in a remote area, not a good thing you want to do, right? The other thing is that we want it to be an area where we're not jeopardizing the environment. One thing that we tend to see now are people feeding on heavy use pads, concrete pads. We characterize those as winter feeding areas. An area where we can provide feed to livestock that is a secure surface. It doesn't jeopardize the nutrients running off. I think that's very important today. And the more muck you have animals running through trying to get to feed, the more energy wastage you will have as well. So we want it in an area that's not going to be subject to environmental problems. We'd like to have it possibly in an area that's out of sight, out of mind. You know, we don't need everybody in the world driving by and looking at us feeding our livestock, but we certainly need to be able to see it. It needs to be convenient. Our forage, if we're providing it, needs to be accessible. And the other thing, it might need a special water system. All water systems throughout a grazing system don't need to be the same. A winter watering trough is not going to be the same as a frost-proof watering system that you have on a heavy use pad, for example. It saves us some money if we plan accordingly. So do think about that winter feeding area. Where are you going to be putting it? How will you be providing those nutrients? And protect the environment. And do it in an efficient manner that saves you money, protects the environment, and in a location where you can watch your livestock on a daily basis. I think that's important in terms of site consideration. And something today we should think about in everything we position on a farm. You know, one thing we've been discussing, supplementation. Where would you start to put your money when you think about supplementation or the need for winter feed? And it's right here behind me where I'd start. Why not make efficient use of your resources that you have? What provides most of the nutrition during the growing season to livestock? It's the pasture. Why not better manage that resource? We can increase the carrying capacity on that ground, provide more and better quality forage, protect the environment, save money. A winter feed program for livestock is one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive periods of their management. Invest money here. It'll save you money and supplementation later. You can do that by sitting down and get a grazing management plan written. Create more subdivisions. Don't overgraze. Design areas where water systems can be put in and be utilized by multiple paddocks. But invest money and time in developing your pasture system. It'll save you money in that winter supplementation program later.
Thanks again for joining us for our October edition of Forage Focus. Catch us next month for another set of intriguing topics.